welcome to our first SegBasics video. Today, we're going to be delving into severe weather categories and what to expect with each risk, as how it can impact you, can impact your property as well. We're going to go ahead and start off with this chart though with what to expect. This is from thunderstorms that are non-severe, level 0, no severe storms expected, to high risk, where it's completely opposite, looking at widespread severe storms development, pretty much dangerous storms moving through. And with each different risk, again, this is just a ladder of going from low end to high end severe storms being possible. And even with the pictures you can tell, you have your average storm here with the low risk to, again, deadly tornadoes being possible with the highest risk. And today I'm going to break that down for you for what to expect with each and every risk, as it can get a little confusing, especially with, let's say, from the slight to enhanced with what to expect, or from moderate to high for what to expect. But I'm going to be breaking that down again for you in this video. Starting off with your general risk, this is level 0, meaning thunderstorms do not produce any severe weather. If at worst they will reach up to 40 miles per hour, but even then that's considered non-severe for storms. As for storms to be severe, they have to reach a threshold of 58 miles per hour or greater. But usually with these type of storms, they produce lightning, which is given with any storm, heavy rainfall, and at times small hail with stronger downpours. And even with small hail, they don't tend to produce much damage. If anything, you may have maybe some slight dents on some window frames. You will see that occur. These type of storms may be slight damage to your outdoor furniture, but even then, it doesn't produce much in the way of anything, as these storms also tend to be lasting only about 20 to about 30 minutes, so not long lasting storms. They're only slightly hinder your outdoor plan. So let's say you have an outdoor barbecue at 2 o'clock and you get this downpour coming out of nowhere. They may only last for 5 minutes and be done and over with. That's what these types of storms usually entail. And these risks are very common though, as they occur from April through August, and they can also still be common in the fall months from September, October, and even in November as well. You'll see more of those risks occur within that time frame with some of these storms. Now, with an example of this risk, this is from January 10th of 2017, so nowhere near the spring, summer, winter months. Fall months, excuse me, but smack dab in the winter, is January 10th, 2017. This is an example of a general risk, meaning again, isolated storms, non-severe, being possible in this area. Which again, if you find yourself in this risk zone, means that again, may have dodged a couple downpours, maybe a thunderstorm, but other than that, you're pretty much safe for 99% of the people in this area. As usually with these storms, they only heavily impact 1% or 2% of people, but the other 98% of people typically do not see anything from these storms. Now we move on to our first level of severe weather, that being our marginal risk, which means a couple storms may turn severe and impact isolated areas, which means damaging winds reaching up to about 60 miles per hour. This is where we get the severe thunderstorm threshold, and this does mean that a hail can also reach up to about an inch possible as well. But usually you'll most likely see more common instances of pea size to about a $half sized hail, so much more of that rather than 1 inch. But the worst storms again can produce up to 1 inch of hail. And isolated tornado or two is also possible with these storms, as you may get an isolated EF0, EF1, maybe brief spin up field tornado. You could see some of that occurring with this type of risk. And these storms only hinder your outdoor activities a little bit. These storms again are short-lived. They typically last as much as 30 minutes, maybe 45 minutes before they dissipate and they're gone, just like that. So these are quick and done storms that we call it with this marginal risk. And these storms are also very common during the year as well, especially in spring and summer, and also quite common in the fall months too across the country. Even the Pacific Northwest, you guys are not safe, as this can still happen at any given point during the year. And even the Southwest, still some of that action does occur there as well. And here's an example of that, indicated here from an Outlook back on July 15th, 2018, a general midsummer day. This is an example of a marginal risk, a low-end risk for strong storms in this area. And again, it means your backyard is 95% likely not to get hit, but the other 5% chance that it can still get hit. That's again what this entails. Now we move on to scattered severe storms, which this is where storms become a little more impactful, looking at damaging winds reaching in excess of 60 miles per hour, so much more stronger winds, maybe close to 70 miles per hour at the worst. Expecting large hail to be over an inch possible, and a couple to a few tornadoes also being possible with this risk. So looking at a bit more impacts for your outdoor plans, especially let's say you have one in the afternoon, they can last a bit longer, but up to an hour, if not more, is the duration these storms tend to last overall. And outdoor objects can be thrown around, vegetation, infrastructure can be damaged, such as, let's say, a tree that can be knocked over or heavily damaged with these type of storms. And with tornadoes, you may see more EF1, maybe an EF2. You could see that being possible with some of these storms. And this risk does tend to be also a bit common, usually occurs several to numerous times a year in any given area. So you may have a slight risk occur, let's say on March 17th, and you may have another one occur like March 28th in your area. That's how soon these risks come up. They're still a bit more common throughout the course of the year, especially in the spring and again in fall. You'll see those occur most often in those months as well. Now, looking at what to expect, this is a slight risk. This actually, funny enough, is from when I was on a storm chase trip with Ball State during this time on May 29th, 2021. I was in this general area. This is a slight risk zone over eastern parts of Colorado going down into New Mexico. This is an example of a slight risk against scattered severe storms. If you find yourself in this area, this again mean be a little more cautious with outdoor activities. Be watching the radar a bit more, as again, this can mean again it can heavily impact your outdoor plans if you do plan to have any. And now we move on to enhanced risks, which is a bit more impactful. These risks tend to be a bit more severe with its impacts, looking at severe storms becoming much more numerous, damaging winds exceeding 70 miles per hour, maybe closing in on 80 miles per hour with the worst storms, large hail over an inch, highly possible, and looking at several tornadoes also being possible, with some being strong as well, seeing that occur with this risk much more often. And with this risk, it does mean that outdoor plans, unfortunately, heavily impacted. So let's say you have outdoor event at 2 o'clock on the Tuesday afternoon, that could be heavily impacted by this event, meaning that the storms will be coming in and lasting for long periods of time. So unfortunately, these storms, not only are they long lasting in its duration, they're also can be long lasting in intensity, as they can last for 2, 3, 4 hours and still continue its intensity throughout the time frame. So looking at much more of those long lasting storms being possible. Vegetation can be debarked, as such as seeing trees, power lines be knocked over. Property damage is also more likely, especially given the potential for EF2s and EF3 tornadoes being likely, maybe even the borderline EF4 is also possible with these type of risks. And these tend to occur only a couple to a few times a year in any given area, mainly for the Midwest, Deep South, Plains, and then Northeast, Mid Atlantic. This risk does tend to impact you a bit more. Not so much the West Coast. This risk tends to be very rare over there, but for everyone else, it's much more common. Especially again, given the eastern part of the U.S. sees a lot more moisture, this heavily impacts severe weather prone areas the most. An example of this risk is from May 12th, 2023, looking at enhanced risk over northeastern Nebraska into Idaho. This is Iowa, excuse me. This is an example of an enhanced risk, which you find yourself in this area. Again, you need to be very much alert, especially these storms being long lasting. And again, it will heavily impact your outdoor activities. You may see a couple schools be canceled. You may even see a couple churches closed down for these type of events. And now we move on to the second to worst category. This is the level 4 risk for severe weather, being the moderate risk, which means widespread severe storms are more likely to occur with damaging winds exceeding 80 miles per hour with the worst of the storms, and destructive hail over 2 inches. So seeing hail up to about 4 inches with some of these stronger storms. So looking at more likelihood of seeing some damage to your livelihood, especially your homes will be damaged, vegetation heavily debarked, so trees numerous trees are like knocked over or heavily destroyed. Outdoor objects such as, for example, lawn chairs are pretty much gone. Either they're down the street or they're just gone in general. And with the given risk of numerous strong to violent tornadoes, this does mean that you will see more tornadoes in the EF3, EF4 range, maybe even EF5. A prime example of this happened, unfortunately, back in 2011, where we had a moderate risk for severe weather over Missouri, and this did lead to the Joplin, Missouri tornado. If you do remember, that one was an EF5, killed over 150 people tragically, and caused numerous injuries as well. Unfortunately, this is what does occur with this type of risk. So basically, risk to be feared, as this is one of the more dangerous risks that could happen. And these tend to occur only once, maybe twice a year. But again, when they do occur, they are often very infamous. And these do typically impact severe weather prone areas much more, especially deep south or the plains. You'll see this at least once or twice a year. The Midwest, I'll say mainly once a year, as these tend to be more rare for you guys, as you don't have, as with the moisture, it's not always going to be there for this type of event to occur. But when again it does occur, it's often very significant, even in those areas as well. But elsewhere, it's pretty much rare, if not zero, for that to occur as well. But looking at an example of that, this is from April 12th of 2020, smack dab in the middle of COVID, and on literal Easter Sunday too. This is a moderate risk over much of Deep South. This event was pretty impactful. Did bring quite a bit of damaging tornadoes. Unfortunately, quite a few people died from this outbreak. This is an example of what a moderate risk does. And if you find yourself in the middle of this, again, this means that, again, you definitely need to have an action plan ready, because again, at any point your home could be heavily damaged, or again, you might lose a lot of your things, especially with this type of risk. So this is one to absolutely take very seriously, as this risk again can cause a lot of damage. And if you didn't think that was serious enough, we move on to our high risk, where we have severe thunderstorms expected, very much likely, level 5 risk, high-end damaging wind threat, large hail, internal threat is often a guarantee, and especially in the higher upper epsilon range, looking at about 45% risk of all of these occurring, maybe higher. The ratio in a tornado outbreak is likely with these type of risks, as unfortunately these type of risks tend to be, even though they're quite rare, they are very much the most feared risk in general, as these pretty much shutter all outdoor activities. All that's canceled. Basically, churches, schools, everything is shut down. Even small businesses, even some businesses, they shut down for this type of weather, as with these occurring. And this is something not to be messed with, as with these type of risks, widespread destruction is possible, if not guaranteed, for some areas, especially with some of the violent tornadoes, as this risk doesn't guarantee the likelihood for seeing EF4s and even EF5 tornadoes being likely. Prime example, back in April 27, 2011, there was a high risk for severe weather for much of Deep South, led to 4 EF5 tornadoes occurring around within that area, even around the area. I've seen that led to all that occurring, and unfortunately, this risk, even though it's quite rare, can still happen every 1 to 2 or so years. And the last one, for example, happened on April 2nd in 2025. And speaking of that, this is the area that affected, pretty much hit Illinois to Arkansas, and these areas were heavily affected by the severe weather. And even the areas surrounding that saw a significant outbreak. And unfortunately, again, if you find yourself in this risk zone, this is basically, you better have your action plans ready to go, because at any moment the storm can hit, and it could either be meaning your home's gone, reduce the slabs, or at times, sometimes your city being heavily destroyed or gone. That's what these type of events occurs. This is worst case scenario events occurring with these type of risk. But luckily, again, we haven't had one in the last year or so, but we were overdue for another one, potentially maybe later this year, or it could happen again next year. Watching that very closely. Now, a lot of you may have questions about, does that mean that lower risk are more safe? Since I just went over it again, the high risk, moderate risk being pretty significant. Well, if you're thinking, oh, I'm more safe if I'm in a marginal risk, or if I'm in a slight risk, or if I'm in a general risk, I would say no. Well, mainly for marginal slight, because with these type of risk, they still pose the potential for dangerous conditions, and it only takes one storm during your day. For example, this is from May 20th of 2022 with the Gaylord, Michigan tornado. This was an EF3 tornado, led to two people being killed, 44 injuries as well, and that all occurred with this one tornado. It was the significant tornado of the day in a slight risk zone, and yet this tornado caused quite a bit of damage with an EF3 tornado and led to this occurring, which again just shows you that you can't let your guard down any severe risk, as any one of them can bring just this kind of damage in general. And now you also may think, does a higher risk also mean that my house is guaranteed to be hit by a tornado? And if you're thinking that, I mean, you're not wrong, but at the same time, you're also incorrect, as even though there's a high, even with a high risk, it doesn't necessarily guarantee that there's a 100% chance that your house is going to be completely destroyed by a tornado, as usually these type of risk, um, even for that to occur, it's like a once in probably 100 years, maybe even longer than that kind of deal. As the highest risk we have ever gotten with a tornado was a 60% risk, and even that occurred 20 years ago. It's been a long time since we had that kind of risk. But even then, even though it's only 4, even though it's only 6% risk, does not mean you're not does not mean that you should let your guard down. It still means that's very much a high chance that this can occur. And the prime example of this was from March 17th to March 18th of 2021. Believe it or not, with the St. Patrick's Day outbreak, this outbreak itself killed no one and injured 6 people, which is quite surprising given the fact that there's a high risk smack dab in the middle of Mississippi. But notice how all the tornadoes, significant tornadoes, occurred just outside of that in Alabama and even southern parts of Mississippi. This is largely due to some of the factors that went wrong with this outbreak. That being the cloud cover, the rainfall, dynamics weren't quite there for the setup in the afternoon. That's what this outbreak kind of did, as unfortunately was hindered by that. But definitely was good news for those in Deep South, as if this risk did perform the way it did, this toll would have been a lot higher than zero. It probably would have been well into the 20s, maybe 30s. Who knows how many deaths this thing would have caused and injuries as well. But overall, death was still, even despite the fact that it was only a not really severe turn outbreak, it did bring quite a bit of wind damage as well, with wind gusts up to 65 knots, which is roughly about 80 miles per hour, if not greater, with these storms. But again, that's pretty much what to expect with high risk. I think that's pretty much, this is pretty much again how high risk they can fail as well. But other than, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. I know it's a lot to unpack, a lot of different things, you know, to discuss with this video. But I do appreciate the support, and also enjoyed this video. Don't forget to hit the like button if you enjoyed it. And if you want to see more content like this, or like my daily weather post as well, don't forget to subscribe to always get updated on whenever I post a video on this channel. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great day, and stay weather aware.